Hello, Steve Koukoulas, Economist in residence at Zagga, and what a month it's been. So many things unfolding in terms of economic policy, in terms of the economy more fundamentally, and of course our friends at the Reserve Bank left interest rates steady earlier in November. So where to start? Let's start with the RBA. They made a decision to keep rates steady. The cash rate has been on hold since November last year, so a full 12 months with steady interest rates. And the RBA Governor, Michelle Bullock, refused to rule anything in or out, which has been her method of saying that the economy is still evolving in many uncertain ways. What's happening domestically, globally, to the consumer side of the economy is still a little unclear. And while she was happy to see inflation falling, headline inflation in particular, she was still just a little nervous about what she calls the trimmed mean inflation rate, which is, in the RBA's assessment, a measure of the underlying inflation trends in the economy. She'd like to see that a little lower before she can confidently say she's going to be cutting interest rates. And that's despite the fact that many countries that are comparable to Australia have been cutting rates and cutting them more than once in many instances. So you've got the UK, Canada, the US, Eurozone, New Zealand, that are all cutting interest rates and getting to or near or below the Australian official interest rate. So that's the thing that's going to influence the RBA as well. In terms of the general economy, it remains sluggish, it remains weak, and even though we had the income tax cuts and some of the relief from the electricity subsidy that was paid during the September quarter, consumer demand only inched up a little. So it's sort of arresting that weakness that we'd seen earlier, but it's fair to say that the consumer is still very subdued, that the economy is still weak. And because of that, the labour market, while jobs are being created, the unemployment rate is trending a little bit higher from where we were a year ago. Now, the really interesting thing for me is the housing market. And it's a sort of a good news, bad news story. House prices are weakening. We actually had Sydney prices falling in the month of October, the first time they'd dropped in almost 2 years. Melbourne's already declining. We've got weakness occurring in Darwin, Hobart and Canberra. So you've got roughly 2/3 of the Australian populace or the housing sector with prices flat to down. The boom cities, Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane, they're still increasing, but the rate of increase is starting to decelerate. So this concern about affordability, cost of living pressures, the slight deterioration in the labour market are all impacting, and there's been a big lift in the number of new listings for sale. So it's a buyer's market, as they say. And I think that for the next little while, with immigration continuing to weaken, we'll probably have this supply and demand of housing moving back towards equilibrium. And when these other things kick in, we'll probably have house prices flat to slightly lower over the next 12 months. No crash, of course, but we'll just have after an incredible boom in the last 2 years, probably just a period where prices are just down a smidge in most of the big capital cities. The really interesting thing to me too is the building approvals numbers. Now, they're choppy from month to month according to whether there's a big apartment block that's been approved or not. But interestingly, and admittedly from a very low base, in trend terms, we put a trend line through, we've had 7 consecutive months where building approvals have increased. So is this the builders market sort of saying, the property developers saying, look, we can see some opportunities here, that access to credit's a little bit easier, some of the construction costs, while they're not cheap, have certainly stopped increasing at that incredible pace that we saw a year or two back. And are we in the early stages of a meaningful pickup in new dwelling construction? Do you know what? I think we are. And the way that the federal, state and local governments are trying, with limited success, but with some success, to fast track building approvals processes, maybe 2025 will be a year where we get a pretty decent lift in residential construction. So a lot happening. We're getting towards the end of what's been a tumultuous year for the economy. I'm looking forward to the final roundup next month and then looking ahead into what's in store for 2025. So on behalf of Zagga, this is Stephen Koukoulas signing off. So thanks very much.